Hey folks, welcome to the show. My name is Thilana Rathnayaka, and most people call me T. By day, I'm a site reliability engineer, and by night, I'm a whole bunch of other things. I'm a DJ, I'm a content creator, an aspiring writer, and now I guess a podcast host. On this show called Tech Related, we interview interesting people in tech and adjacent fields to learn about their experiences and answer the question of, what do you really do? Through these interviews, we hope to learn more about their stories, their lessons learned, and the overlap that exists within so many fields in this hyper-connected world. If this is your first time tuning in, please check out our website online at techrelatedpodcast.com, where we'll have a link to all of our speakers, show notes, and any other supporting details. If you enjoyed the show, or even if you hated it, we'd love to hear your feedback. Please reach out to us at show@techrelatedpodcast.com. Yep, that's an email. Or tweet us at TechRelatedShow on Twitter. And now for today's very first guest. Today's guest is someone that I enjoy speaking to regularly to learn about the account management and customer experience side of our industry, more known as AM or CX. And it's someone that continues to teach me something new with every single interaction. Whether it's truly understanding what acronyms like ARR or TCV means, or breaking down the sales bro memes, Ben is the perfect person to guide anyone through a 10,000-foot view of this part of the industry. The history of how we both got into tech is interestingly interconnected, and I'm so excited to welcome them onto the show. Ladies and gentlemen, my first guest, Ben Edelstein.
Thank you, T.
Ben, how's it going today?
Fantastic, thanks.
So one thing I've shamelessly stolen off of my first ever podcast experience is I love to ask all of our guests, what are they drinking today? And I see you have an interesting beverage in front of you.
I've got a Mountain Dew Caribbean Splash.
All right.
It's got a natural and artificial guava flavor.
And of the selection that you had presented to you, what made you go with the Mountain Dew Caribbean Splash?
The chem was the most engaging. And I think that this talk today is going to be a reflection of that.
Okay. So. On my end here, I have a brand safe carbonated cola, zero sugar, vanilla flavored. I decided to go with this because in elementary school, when people were trying to ask how to pronounce my name, I said Thilana, and they said, yes, vanilla. And anyways, that's an interesting anecdote from my high school experience that I wanted to share with everyone on this planet. But let's get along with the show. So, Ben, give us a really quick spiel introduction. What is your name, and what do you do? What's your vibe?
Yeah, I'm Ben. I am a manager of account management. So what that looks like is, as an AM, I'm responsible for the retention of customers. I'm responsible for the expansion of customers. I'm responsible for being their strategic partner on an ongoing basis. And yeah, leading a team of folks who would do that. At the moment, I'm kind of a bit of a both player and a coach. Mm-hmm. So I'm handling usually the largest enterprise accounts. But generally speaking, I'm there to ramp up the account management team underneath me.
So that's why, like I saw on your LinkedIn, it was manager, account management, because account management is like what the ICs do. Like that's their role, and 100%. Then you're leading that team. Yeah. So for people that may not be in tech, because this is meant to be like even for tech adjacent, what is account management? I think this is where probably like the sales cycle might come into play. Is that part of it?
Yeah. So most people are going to be familiar with sales goes out, lands a logo, spends a ton of time getting them, right? And then once the contract is signed, the best way to think about it is, they're a fisherman. They've spent all that time landing the fish. They throw the fish over their shoulder. Mm-hmm. They don't then turn around and start taking care of the fish. They throw that, that hook back in the water,
right,
to land the next big one, right? So I'm behind them with a fish tank.
Okay.
And that would be like my portfolio. Okay. So I may have, 20 or 30 fish. And my responsibility is when they land them, sometimes they're little minnows and sometimes they're, decent size.
Right.
But fish can grow.
Right.
Okay. And so just like in my aquarium, I'm feeding them. I'm making sure that they're well taken care of. I'm changing the tank, and if you follow this analogy, I'm trying to grow these fish as big as I can, right? And so too does the spend increase. So what I'm there as is a strategic partner.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you think about it in your example, right? Vanilla has landed. Sorry.
I love it.
You shouldn't have told me
keep
that.
Going,
all these years of friendship.
Yeah, keep it going. Keep going.
Vanilla sold you on the idea of using, let's say, these 2 or 3 modules.
So Vanilla is the company, like a tech company that's selling.
No, you in this case.
Oh, I'm the
you
company.
Are Vanilla.
Gotcha.
You're
I'm
the
Vanilla.
sales guy.
Right.
You're the sales guy, Vanilla. So I approach the customer and say, hey, look, customer, Vanilla has sold you on the idea of using these 2 or 3 modules.
Okay.
You've been with us for a year now. My question is, there are 3 or 4 other modules that we sell. Why aren't you using them?
Right.
And the idea is that I, as the account manager, who have been their strategic partner, who have been working with them to basically align with their goals and objectives, seen them grow, worked with them to make sure the product's working for them.
Mm-hmm.
I've built a bit of rapport with
Right.
this client, right? I've built a relationship with this client.
Right.
And so I'm taking that goodwill that I've secured with them over the last year to get them to look at, let's say, those 3 or 4 other modules
Right.
that we sell
Okay.
that they haven't taken a look at today, right? And so too, what I'm doing is not only am I making the existing relationship stickier, but I'm generating new business,
Right.
right? And so that fish is growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, that's kind of the idea behind being an account manager, is constantly not only securing the existing, business that you have,
Mm-hmm.
but constantly pushing the client to take a bigger investment, a bigger step.
Right.
Because you as a vendor are likely improving the product.
Gotcha.
And some of that may be a new product offering that you can actually sell. So that is really account management in a nutshell.
That's awesome, because especially my next question was going to be like, how would you explain this in like an analogy to like an ant at a party or something?
Exactly.
So like the tank behind you and
Yeah.
like feeding the fish.
Yeah.
So if I understand it correctly, this is post-sales. So after the sales are made,
Exactly.
you grow, expand, you make the product sticky, you make sure like you try to ensure that the customer is there. But I guess there's probably some like maybe like checkpoints or like flags or areas you try to aim for. I guess like in development, it's very much like, get the feature out, and then as
Yeah.
soon as the feature's out, it's like you keep expanding or add features. But for you, is it more like, is there intervals that you're looking at, or?
Well, I mean, the big thing, right, is when the salesperson has landed that client,
Mm-hmm.
that sales process can take a couple of weeks, couple of months, even a couple of years, depending on the complexity and the size of
Right.
the enterprise customer, right? They've probably put together some big business case.
Okay.
And that big business case may have lofty goals.
So this is the customer has a business case
Yes.
for your software.
No, the salesperson has worked with the customer to put together a business case to land that business in the first place, right?
That's really interesting, because I think back to my own experiences. It's like, hey, I want to get this hot new service. And then the first thing that your manager or someone will ask you is like, what's the business case? What's
Right.
the justification?
Exactly.
And sales will coach them to get to that point.
Absolutely.
I get it.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So, your question there around, I guess, kind of milestones is one of the first things I want to do is get that business case and basically say, hey, what was the expectation set and
Right.
over what period of time, and what kind of ROI, return on investment, are we looking at?
Yeah.
Because if right off the bat, if I'm not making sure 1 year out, let's say, that we haven't hit all of the milestones that you set out to initially achieve,
Right.
let alone additional things that I've put on your radar as you've come on board, that then becomes a potential of a churn risk, where because we're in a software as a service space, you're on 1 year, 2 year, maybe 3 year terms.
And this might be where like people defer, is like they might be used to like software being a thing that you buy every year, but that's changed like drastically. It's all
Massively.
subscription based software as
Yes.
a service. You're working on those renewal cycles.
Yes. Yeah. And so my big thing about, being an account manager, if you think about it kind of like in building a house, is you can't build a second level if the first one isn't stable, right? And that first stable level is, what did you initially buy? What were you sold, both in terms of the products and services, but also in terms of what we are going to actually deliver on, right?
Gotcha.
That promise. Maybe it's functionality that frankly didn't exist, but we said we were going to get to it in a quarter or two.
Right.
I have to track that, because those things that we failed to deliver on in the first year will be the reason that you don't stick around.
Right. And that's, I think you use another term. So I've heard sticky as like a good thing. You want to be sticky,
Yeah.
but churn is a bad word. You don't want churn.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my
Tell me about
gosh,
that. Like
nightmares.
why that word? What does that mean?
Churn means you're leaving, or it means that, in terms of what you're spending, you're going to reduce it, right?
Okay.
So maybe the sales guy comes to you and says, T, I can save you 200 grand a year, and it's going to be $100,000 subscription.
Right.
A lot of businesses love that idea. Pay 100 to save 200, no problem. There we are 9 months in. You've only saved 30 grand.
Right.
Are you still going to pay $100,000 to save 30?
I get what you mean. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So that would be more of like revenue churn. You're still sticking around as a logo, but you're turning around to me saying, look, I think it's really only a $30,000 savings. So we think it'd be more appropriate to reduce our existing engagement with you to closer to a $20,000 to $25,000 subscription. I'll tell you, a lot of clients don't go that route. They'd rather just leave altogether and go to a competitor, because frankly, especially nowadays, there's, you know what, for every Pepsi, there is a Coke. So.
Right. Everyone's got a competitor. It's a very like congested space. It's like Call of Duty Warzone. There's a lot of airstrikes happening. I don't know why that's the first thing I thought about. Thinking about logos, there's like, these like getting me the terms I've heard all around. And every time I've seen anything in the CX space, I've seen that they refer to the book of business as like, yeah, you got to be able to handle this book of business. Yeah. I'm assuming like logos, book of business, there's a connection there. Like that's what you maintain. That's like your record. Yeah.
I mean, I guess to extend the example I was using before, that's the fish tank metaphor that I was referring to earlier. Your book of business is your 20 or 25 accounts that you're responsible for, right? Okay. It really depends on the average, I guess, selling price of your solution. If you are the kind of SaaS business that sells a subscription for $1,000 a year, you may have 500 clients.
Okay.
Because that's a $5 million book. Or you may have, if you're in the enterprise space, you may only have 50 logos.
Right.
Each one of your 50 logos is spending 100, 150K. In both scenarios, you're still managing, let's say, a $5 million book, but it's very different in terms of how many clients you're managing. And so ultimately, the industry that you're working with, the spend that you're working with, it all refers to the book of business, but some may speak to a high volume versus they may speak to high value customers, right?
And so like that would also depend on the market you're in. Like you said, enterprise, you might have less, your book might have less pages, but it's still worth the same, or if not more. Is it common that when you're starting out, especially earlier in your career, you would have a place that has more volume and less?
Definitely.
Okay, so you start off with like the smaller fish before you get to the whales.
Yeah, you bet. And I guess the best way to think about it, right, is the more junior you are, the more untested you are. Think of it from the business's perspective, right? They've spent a ton of time, a ton of money, and frankly, their reputation in landing this logo.
Right.
Now they're going to put that logo in your hands.
Right.
It's almost like if you were a babysitter, I guess, right? Like you're not going to leave your one and only child or your two kids with a babysitter who's never looked after children before. These are your pride and joy, your special ones. Those are your enterprise accounts. Right. Those are your big ones. They're on the website. They're your reference clients. Anyone who touches big enterprise accounts are either really experienced or frankly are the executives of the business because they don't trust anyone. And they kid glove them like crazy, right?
I just love hearing about different jobs and how all those like interactions happen. But I'm also very curious about relationships. So I have a bit of a hidden stake in this question in that I used to work in support. A big part of my career was coming up through support. And we were in the CX world because support and CX kind of work very closely.
You bet.
For us, it was more that when support tickets would come in, we would help them on the technical side. But if it was like, hey, like not happy with the spend or like, you know, like I want a refund or like this is not what we like we were promised or we want this feature, like we would make a note of it. But the first thing was like the moment the customer says it's something not support related, hands off, CX, hand it over to CX. And like, I'm sure at times we're like, oh, please just request an AM. Please request an AM. I'll just send it over.
Yeah.
But how much do you interact with support? Because I'm curious what it's like at different places. But how much do you also interact with sales? Because they are immediately the ones talking to the customer before handing over to you. Is there like, do you talk afterwards like, hey, heads up, we got this big whale. This is what they're looking for. Or is it like, hey, thanks for this giant fish you got me. I'll take it from here. Like,
yeah, I mean, the answer is all of that, right?
Yeah.
You know, sales has spent the last 9 months building relationships and really understanding the use case, understanding the organization. At the point of closing that business, there is no one in the company that knows that client better than the sales rep. So it would be foolish to get intro to the account and start the process of discovery again, knowing full well that you could just pick up the phone and talk to a third party, Dave, who already works with you, right? That you could sit down for 30 minutes and say, Dave, tell me everything I need to know. And they sit down and they tell you all the intangibles, right? They say things like, okay, well, the regional VP, Phil, he's a bit prickly.
Okay, yeah. The who's who. And
exactly, right? And just understanding the lay of the land with the account. So definitely working with sales that way. Mm-hmm. The other way too is sometimes sales will get asked from customers, well, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but what will it look like after I sign on? So there's been lots of times where the sales rep will actually get myself on a call. Mm-hmm. The client hasn't even signed, just to do an introduction to say, hey, look, if you come on board with us, this is Ben. He will be your account manager.
Okay, yeah.
He's really excited to meet you. Ben, could you run through what that process looks like? And I come in and I say, hey, yeah, no problem. And so it creates this idea that it's a warm handoff and that it's a seamless transition and that you're not starting from scratch. Here is myself and Dave on the call together. Right. We're comparing notes. We're talking to you directly. This is a seamless, process. Right. So anywhere that you can kind of, grease the edges, I guess, as it were, to make it seamless from transitioning from one team to another. Yeah. You definitely do that.
It's like if you're buying like a Lambo and there's like the sales guy on the floor, but it's like, all right, thanks for spending all this money, but here's your like client services guy, the guy that's gonna like,
exactly.
If you need anything, talk to Ben. He's your guy, kind of.
Here's your dedicated service guy. Inevitably, when you have to change some part on your Lamborghini, maybe it's like a foot pedal for $22,000, he'll take care of you.
But the difference is, in this scenario, the Lamborghini is always changing. Like there's more features being added. There's other Lamborghinis that a customer could switch into if they're not feeling it.
And I guess, sorry, just as a follow-up there, you asked also about the support.
Yeah.
Support, I definitely work with, right? Because what's happening is I don't necessarily, as the account manager, want to be the person that they're coming to for technical related questions, right? They're certainly welcome to hit me up, but frankly, there are times where I'm the least qualified to resolve a technical issue, right? Especially if it's around things like integrations.
Right.
I don't really know how the secret sauce works.
Right. Different wheelhouses.
They don't pay me to know that exactly. So I do, obviously work with support in conjunction to make sure that the client experience is seamless. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I'm CC'd on everything.
Right.
I'm working with anyone that will touch the customer, whether it be pre-sales, post-sales, or even just, I think, through references, right? Even just getting a good reference for new business from an existing customer.
Right. Okay, so I think you've given me a lot here. Let me see if I've got this framed properly.
Yeah.
So sales reaches out, they have a relationship with the customer, and they're like, hey, you should totally buy this thing. And they convince the customer's like, yeah, let's do it. They sign the dotted line, contract signed, sealed, delivered, and then the customer moves over to you because now they're post-sales.
Correct.
Customer has technical support-related questions. They'll go to support, get that resolved, hopefully. But you're CC'd. You see everything that's happening.
You bet.
But then you're kind of just basically like their white glove point of contact for managing their whole account, like the whole way through, all the way to renewal.
Yes. However, I do want to add one major addendum, which we haven't touched on.
What's that?
The role of customer success.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more. CX. I hear this all the time. CX, yes. CS. What does it mean?
So
this is all setting us up for like the big question, by the way. So I love it. It's more supporting info.
I'm happy to segue for you. Yeah. So, the big thing at the end of the day is, and this is sort of up for every organization, right? Mm-hmm. Some organizations will get their customer success team to manage renewals.
Okay.
That is a bit of a hybrid role.
Okay.
Because it's very difficult to be the customer success advocate, which customer success is, and also be the bad guy,
right,
come renewal time when there's contractual conversations to be had. Mm-hmm. So a lot of CSMs struggle with that. And as someone who has done, that hybrid position before, as a CSM who is also responsible for renewals, I sucked at the CSM part and was great at the commercials.
Okay.
But I also had peers that were phenomenal at problem solving and building, good goodwill in the customer, but were terrified to have any sort of contractual or commercial type conversations.
Right.
We had the exact same job title. And so what a lot of organizations are doing and have realized is, even though it's more expensive to have two roles, a customer success manager and an account manager, it's more efficient because the account manager comes in and make sure from a contractual standpoint that the existing business is rock solid and they're flipping over every opportunity they can to drive new business.
Right.
And they will also be the bad guy. So the CSM gets to stay there and be like, I know Ben can be, a little insistent, but he's just, he's just looking out for your strategic benefit.
Right.
They don't have to compromise, their customer success role. They get to be the advocate. They get to be the nice person.
They get to be the good guy.
They get to be the good guy. And they get to take the time
right.
to really ensure that the customer is, end users are using the tool. They're comfortable. They're happy.
Mm-hmm.
They can talk about if there's a different workflow of the way the buttons work. All those kinds of activities that let's say as a manager of account managers, if I heard the AM having those conversations that say, hey, look, that's great.
Right.
But technically you're not driving revenue in asking about how buttons operate.
One is so the expansion, the renewal, that's AM's very focused on that.
Yes.
CSMs are like, I have the pamphlet. I know how you operate. Have you tried these things yet?
100%.
Yeah, okay.
And the CSM and the AM in the most successful organizations it's like a buddy cop movie.
Okay, yeah.
You're tag teaming everything.
Right.
You're joining all calls, you're on all emails together, and both of you know when the client gets on, you said support, and it's an AM question. You get on the call with the client and they start talking about, and the button doesn't do what it needs to do.
Right.
And the AM just quietly presses mute because for the next 3 minutes, that's a you question.
Right.
Then you answer that and they go, and then, we're already paying for more licenses than we're even needing. The CSM goes on mute. The AM comes off mute and goes, well, I can speak to that. No problem. Have you tried this, that, the other, blah, blah. And so it's just seamless. It's not, both people, if it's well oiled, know exactly whose turf it is.
Right.
So it's not confusing for the client.
Yeah.
And you're doing your job to a high level. I'm doing my job to a high level. Customer gets off the call and goes, wow, I really appreciate this. I feel like we got through a lot.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I didn't have to handle any questions that made me feel icky and vice versa.
It's I kind of see it like the analogy that comes to mind is like you're watching a play and then there's like 3 actors on screen, but like a spotlight flashes on one to expose a different piece, and then it's like the next one.
Perfect.
The spotlight points on whatever you need, and the viewer gets like the best experience. It's funny because I reflect now again on support, and I'm like, these AMs, like, why don't they just like learn how to support the customer? They already talk to them anyways. But I realize the flip side is like we help every customer that comes through the door, and like we know like diagnostic questions asked, and like they'll have a very similar problem space. But for CSMs and AMs, it's like really knowing your customer. If they don't deploy these 3 modules or like 20% in the next 10 weeks, there's a high risk that they're going to churn because that's their specific context. So you guys are very much dealing with the context of the customers.
Yeah.
Very cool. So this actually all gets back to the big question. I was curious whether to ask this first. So Ben, like, what would you say you do here? Like, what do you do at work? And the reason that this question comes up is because a friend of mine that's not in tech was like, so T, do you just like write code and emails all day? Do you just emails? Like, not dude, not write. Do you just email? And I was like, well, email is a part of my job, but like I write code, like I build things. But I notice that everyone in tech, even though they're at a computer, they're doing all kinds of different things. But it's hard to see that because you're behind a screen with a mouse and a keyboard.
Yes.
So like, what do you do all day? And the way I like to ask this question is, if you could like pick a day from last week or the week before, can you like run me through your day from start to finish?
Yeah. So in order of importance, if I have any clients that are renewing in quarter, as in the next 90 days, but I'm much more proactive. I look 120 days out.
Big flex. Yeah.
Yeah.
This guy,
Yeah. Some folks are reactive. I'm proactive.
Oh, damn. All right.
Yeah,
that's a soundbite.
Okay. That's okay. So if I've got any clients that are renewing in the next quarter, I'm looking at, have I sent out the paperwork? As a business, is my value proposition rock solid? Am I worried about this renewal at all?
As in like the paperwork being like the renewal paperwork for the customer to re-up on the subscription
100%.
And the value prop being like, do they still understand why this is good to re-up on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As in, if your renewal is 100K, if I fire you that 100K quote right now, sign it right now.
Yeah.
Do I think you're going to hesitate? Or do I think you're going to sign? Ideally, you know well in advance if that's the case. But that's the stress test, which is what I'm doing and saying, could I fire the paperwork off today right now?
Right.
If the answer is no, I got more work to do. So I'm running down why I think that's the case. Is there a product gap? Are we not using all the licenses? Have I not made the right connection to the right executive? Whatever it may be. So that's on the list to deal with. If I feel like, hey, look, I think we're ready to go. I'm getting that paperwork out the door.
So even if it's within the 90-day window, you'll just send it.
In an ideal world,
Yeah.
if I would set up an alert, which is frankly how I do it today, I say, I go into, let's say, Salesforce or whatever CRM you're using. It has your renewal date in there.
Sorry, what's that? What's a CRM, Ben? Just a really quick tangent. CRM. It's a spreadsheet, right? Is that it? Like, is that?
What's a CRM?
A CRM is a customer resource management software.
There you go.
There we go. It's think of it like a spreadsheet on steroids. It has all the details of your customers, their subscriptions, their key points of contact, when their subscriptions are valid from, when their renewals are. Everything, like your book of business, is kind of from that CRM. All that data is generated from there.
It is the single source of truth.
Ooh,
That's
like that. Yeah.
what every organization is going to call Salesforce. That's probably what Salesforce calls it. If it ain't in Salesforce via email or phone call or whatever, it didn't happen.
Gotcha.
So I go into there, go into CRM, and I would fire off renewals 120 days out. And
wow.
Yeah, and the reason I do that is because some customers may come back and say, what the heck, this is so far out. That's okay. I'm just being proactive.
Right.
No one is ever going to actually get annoyed with you being proactive. It's like showing up early.
Right.
People can be annoyed, but it's not actually as problematic as showing up late.
Right. Yeah.
So I'll send it off. Worst case scenario, it sits in your inbox. Right. So I'll go through that and see if I can get that out. And if I can, I will send it. If not, I'll try and figure out what I think my blockers are. I sit in on a lot of calls. Okay. I go to a lot of product calls with product where customers have requests and products potentially meeting with them. We have meetings set up with our customers on a quarterly basis, QBR, quarterly business review, where we're talking about their existing usage, what their goals and aspirations are for the next 90 days.
That's a term that's huge on TikTok memes right now. It's like, oh yeah, we'll start the QBR, and it's just like slides. 100%. It's like a lot of. It's a big part of what you do.
A lot of slides.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be. It should be more conversational like this.
Right.
Certainly with my best clients, I have no slides.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
I guess because you guys know each other well enough that it's just you can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
It really depends on whether they, as an organization, are really formal or informal.
Okay. Yeah.
And you'd be surprised which ones are very informal. Okay. And others which feel like they need to see some sort of standardized agenda every single time. So it really depends, and you got to set the tone. I think I err on the side of being formal to begin with, and then we can kind of unbutton the shirt as we go. But yeah, I mean, I sit in a lot of client calls just to make sure that I'm getting a temperature check. Obviously, with the customer success manager, anything that's escalating, I'm meeting with that customer that same day. I'm dealing with any sort of AMs that want to do any sort of role playing or scenarios that they're going to run through ahead of time.
And that's specific to you being in a leadership position now, leading other AMs.
You bet. Yeah. So we want to talk about, I've got this call tomorrow. I've got this call later today.
Right.
Let's have the call before we do the call.
And that's because you already have experience, like over hundreds, probably thousands at this point, calls with customers.
And it's great to run. And it's not necessarily doing that as a leader, but you could even do that with a peer because your peer has also been in hundreds of calls. So, attending those role-playing calls and just running through scenarios. Internal planning sessions is a big one too. Right. Talking about, again, what are we going to say to the customer before we meet with the customer? Right.
Your job, like if I can like boil it down, it's like 95% communicating, like sitting on calls, emails, text, like messages.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because like for engineers, like they'll look at a calendar and they're like, oh God, 3 hours of meetings today. It's going to be a bad day.
Yeah.
Whereas for you, I feel like meetings are a huge part of what you do. Like
over 50% of my day.
How much of your, 50%. Yeah, okay.
Way more than that.
Right.
And like hours and hours and hours on end. And that's the reason why you want to have good notes and whatnot. But I mean, like you use the example of a play where you've got one spotlight on one person at a time, right?
Right.
But behind the scenes, there's a stage manager,
right,
telling everyone when's their part and telling the lighting crew who to light up, right? And that's really the AM, is that at the end of the day, you are the quarterback.
Okay.
Because fundamentally speaking, you as the account manager, you own the renewal. Okay. And the money is the lifeblood of the business.
Right.
Because if we could run a business on good anecdotes, then we wouldn't need account managers, right? So you owning the renewal are ultimately responsible for it.
Right.
It is your name and your face that pops up in the report to say the customer churned, the customer expanded, Now there's a lot of other supporting crew involved.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you as the support rep, nobody talks about the fact that you answered 16 support tickets when that customer renewed. Ideally, the account manager.
It is nice. AMs have been like, yo, T, thank you for jumping on these calls. I appreciate that. Yeah.
1,000%. That speaks to being a team player, totally. Yeah. And, I definitely do that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, fundamentally at its core, and I guess that's the thing to impress.
You're the responsible person for this.
You're the quarterback.
Like if there's the racy, like responsible
1,000%.
action, you are responsible for this.
Yes, you're responsible in the sense that the quarterback calls the play and throws the ball.
Right.
So you are ultimately responsible. If you fumble, then no one else can do anything else.
Right.
That's it. Plays dead.
So like speaking of like, I guess consequences, but also like the reward that comes with it. Like I've been in companies where, you'll see salespeople that join one quarter and the next quarter they're gone. And you're like, oh, what happened there? It's like, they didn't meet their targets.
Yes.
But I'm curious, like I wouldn't say compensation, but you mentioned like expansions that's tracked in your favor.
Huge.
Churn not tracked in your favor. Like how does compensation work for CSMs? And I realize, it's different for every company and you don't have to get into specifics.
Totally.
But I am curious because support, it's like very much not quota, but like how much support are you providing? Engineering, are you able to provide features? Are you able to build? What's it like for CSMs? Like and AMs as well, sorry.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, there's two different models to look at, right? One model is, think of it like you're putting all your ingredients into one bucket, and that's a net revenue retention. And that's basically saying they take a snapshot of your book of business, right? We said. So if your book of business is, let's just say for simple math, $4 million, and somehow each quarter is worth $1 million, right?
Okay.
Right? You've got in Q1 $1 million in revenue,
right.
renewals, right?
Gotcha.
So $1 million, right? So they take a snapshot and they say, okay, in Q1, you are responsible for getting that $1 million of business renewed.
Right.
Some businesses will add on a certain percentage to say, we want to see 5% growth in your portfolio. Some businesses will say, we will allow for a certain amount of churn. This is where the, differences in organizations come in. Some organizations will say, we allow for no churn.
Right.
That's incredible. And I know there's a lot of companies that are out there that are like that.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Do they exist? Like, is that even possible?
I think, yes, if you're operating at the highest levels. Okay. Because a single customer leaving would be monumental. Right. If you only sold to the Fortune 500, of which there are many companies, it would be agonizing.
Okay.
Imagine if you were a strategic account manager for Microsoft, each one of your clients.
Right.
Boeing,
okay,
Ford,
I see what you mean, like the highest, the big tickets.
Honeywell. I don't want any of those logos leaving.
Right.
But if you only have 10 of them,
okay, you can spend
then you
more.
want our 100% retention rate. So it really depends on the organization and obviously the kind of customer you're dealing with. But in general, so you're responsible for that $1 million. So what you're doing is you're saying anything that I retain goes to that number and anything I expand goes into that number. And so it creates an added buffer for me.
Right.
Because if I have, let's say, one or two customers that churn on me, I have, of that $1 million, I lose 50 grand in business.
Right.
Right. But I upsold another customer 50 grand.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, I offset it. So I retained 1 million of 1 million, even though the source of that was a little bit different. One logo left, another customer made up the money.
Right.
So that's one way of looking at it, and it's very simplified. A lot of organizations don't really look at it that way because what it does do is it says, if you just get lucky and one of your logos just
like the Hail Mary
decides to spend 4 times as much,
yeah,
you have all this buffer. Who cares? I'll just let the next 10 guys churn.
Right.
It won't make a difference. So another way of looking at it is saying you've got 2 targets. One is a retention target and one is an expansion target.
Okay.
And you've got, a retention side and expansion side. And both of these numbers will correspond to some sort of variable payout for you.
Okay.
So that variable payout will be a prearranged number. So again, using simple math, you're an account manager and you make, 60 grand a year. That's your salary. You also have $60,000 in variable income, which means that each one of your quarters is worth 15 grand.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So then you work backwards and you say, if I need to get $1 million equals $15,000, you can work backwards to figure out
How much each?
How much each dollar of retained business corresponds to your commission.
Right.
Very simple math to do.
Just like, let's see what.
Totally.
Okay.
And so that is how I basically work with account managers to give them an idea of. Let me ask you a question. You can get that customer at, you can upsell them and you can try and get them to spend 10 grand more or 12 grand more. Doesn't feel like a lot. But if I take that extra $2,000 and run it in a spreadsheet and show about the impact, it may actually correspond to more money for you in your commission.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? Of course it does. So being able to run through those numbers and show all that stuff, that's what really incentivizes AMs to get as many dollars as they can.
Right. And like, I think what you're alluding to is like sometimes you can't 100%, like you can't be 100% every customer, but you got to decide who's going to be like more likely to renew or expand, and you focus your efforts as needed. Okay.
And there are times where you're driving major expansion, and what you're doing is you're driving major expansion to give yourself breathing room,
right? Because
you anticipate trouble on the horizon with a couple of other customers.
Oh, so you're also paying attention like customer factors, industry factors, like
all of the above.
It's like, yeah, you're always tuned in because you need to know how this could affect you, like your renewal coming up in your account. Yeah.
You're living in a semi-constant, frankly, I'll say constant state of paranoia.
Right.
Not in like a, negative, I can't function in my life kind of way, but until the deal is signed, ain't nothing a sure thing.
I mean, I think we talked about this too. Like we're both planners.
Yes.
And you mentioned like there's some jobs that like work really well to support planners, and this might be the case for you, right? You're always planning how to like look out for any eventuality with these accounts and these customers.
A healthy dose of anxiety in these types of roles creates high functioning AMs.
Heck yeah. Okay, so you've given me a lot here. Let me make sure I summarize here on like what your day is like. So when you get in, like, I don't know what time or all that, it doesn't matter, but you're looking at like your CRM, your source of truth tell you like what's the state of your book of business, like renewals coming up. And this is where I think it's interesting because you can't really automate this. It's like, you ever played Microsoft Golf, like the old one, where it's like you got to click the space bar at the exact right time to fire off the ball and it lands in the green. But it's like that, but you're looking at renewal and expansion. Like what is the right time to hit the space bar, send that email, send the renewal. And I'm assuming through practice, like, what's the relationship like? Have they expanded? You're looking at all these sources of data and you're constantly massaging your customers to get to the point. So that's calls, emails, slides. So it's like 95% interaction based.
Yes. But at the same time, though, it's important to emphasize the push versus pull effect. I can pull information from the CRM. I can pull information from calls that I've had with customers, right? But there's also the push effect.
Right.
Do not sleep on the benefit of setting up Google alerts.
Okay.
Because that's something that I do. If I have 25 accounts, I set up 25 Google alerts.
Okay.
And they hit my inbox on a Monday morning.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is because if one of my logos is going through layoffs, one of my logos is just won a big bid on a project or whatnot, two things. One, that's the potential for either risk on the horizon, churn if they've done layoffs, or maybe they've made a huge investment and I need to follow up on that.
Right.
Because you got to keep momentum.
Yeah, to capitalize on that
exactly.
investment. Yeah.
And two, look how smart you're going to seem when you get on the call with the customer and you say, hey, I know that 2 days ago you just got awarded that, that patent for that new product out of Thailand. I don't believe you have operations out of there. And they go, actually, that's very astute of you. That's true.
Right.
We are actually going to be looking at acquiring a company in the area.
Right.
Oh, well, we'd be happy to support you with that. But if you don't have that information to start, you are reliant on the customer
giving it to you,
to push that information to you. Right? So you need that information. So if you're not setting up that information to get pushed from an external source, and they're not telling you, how the heck would you know? And
this also explains why you're so active on LinkedIn, Ben. You're always trolling for what the new companies are up to. Okay.
That's true. Plus, I got to make friends with all the all my clients anyways, just to see what they're posting on the side.
All right. Well, we're getting closer to the end. There's two questions that I want to ask you. We've gone through our careers kind of starting at very similar times. Starting off in like very entry, junior, early in career roles, and then expanding outwards. For me, it was support, moving into engineering. For you, you went CSM and then AM or AMs?
I did partners, then CSM, then AM.
Right. And now you are management of account managers.
Exactly.
And that is now a leadership role.
Correct.
How much has your role changed? How different is it? Can you speak a bit more to like what it's like leading the account managers, managing the account managers?
It's a completely different muscle that is not for everyone. You can be a master as an individual contributor. You can be the best individual contributor. You can be the best subject matter expert. It is totally reasonable to say that there are account managers that I manage or will manage down the road that may be better account managers in terms of their skill set as an account manager than myself. But the difference in going down the leadership path is that I get that same sense of achievement and appreciation when I take someone who is newer to the AM field and ramp them up and sharpen their skill set. The ability to, take more junior folks and have them recreate my early wins and that sensation in them elicits the same feeling in me.
So it's like the coaching and the development
1,000%. I don't need to necessarily win a championship. I could be a coach on the side and they're the ones dunking the ball. I still get a ring at the end of the day, but I feel that sense of accomplishment. I don't necessarily long to be on the court. I have played and can play, and I still kind of do on the side. Yeah. But the bigger thing for me is ramping up folks,
right?
Because I had incredible leaders when I was, coming up, and still frankly do. I have lots of role models. So if I can be one of those individuals to the folks that I work with now, that would be huge.
Like, did you always want to move into leadership of account management?
Totally.
What made you want to switch outside of just like expanding? Is it?
Absolutely. I love people. I love people. And a huge thing, and maybe the best way to do it is we have all had managers and we've all had leaders. Until you've experienced and worked with both, you don't understand the difference.
Right.
A manager just barks orders at you, and a leader encourages you to figure it out and troubleshoot it on your own.
Yeah.
And having worked in so many organizations on the way and seen managers and categorize them as managers in my head, I learned I won't be like that. And I've learned that there are behaviors that, I've had leaders in the past demonstrate for me that I think to myself, I will not forget this lesson ever. There are 5-6 moments probably over the last 10 years that very clearly define leadership to me that I've personally experienced.
Right.
That I reflect on all the time and think about and seek to replicate. And so I think in my mind what leadership looks like, not because I've done it, but because it's been demonstrated for me.
Right.
And so I feel very confident in doing that. And I think even in the amount of time that I've been in a leadership role, the success that I've seen has validated what I think I know, and furthers that like I do want to go down that leadership path because I think my ability to give back is exponentially greater as a leader than it is as an individual contributor.
Right, because it's not just the dollars you're getting every quarter; it's like how much that's expanding every quarter afterwards with the people you impact, like your followers. And,
exactly, because I've had leaders over the years that have ramped me up to be an incredible individual contributor. But I think about the fact that, okay, I'm a solid individual contributor. But if I in turn could create 3 Bens, all of which crush it, they're doing more business than I as an individual alone can do.
Right.
So the exponential portion comes from if I can ramp those 3 folks, and a couple years down the line they get promoted to senior, and they can ramp 3 juniors. You can see the increase in revenue for the business, right? Let alone for me, looking back and seeing all these folks that I've dramatically, impressed upon them, what they can do in their career.
Right. Wow. That's, I don't think selfless is the right word, but it's more like you understand the value of development, like
100%
passing it down. That's awesome. And the last question, this one's kind of a funny one. So let's say I'm at a weekend AM party that Ben is throwing. He's got high roller AMs everywhere. Everyone's in their fancy 3-piece suits. What is a hot topic in the industry right now that I could just chime in with a glass of Prosecco in my hand and be like, what's one thing I could say that makes me sound smart or like I fit in with the AMs? What's like a sound bite that I could do?
A sound bite?
Yeah, and explain it to me afterwards,
I think you could turn around to your hotshot AM colleagues and brag about how you have... you totally just copy paste your client emails into ChatGPT to generate responses.
Wow. Okay. Like just like openers or like what they say? Oh, responding to the customers.
Just responses back.
Wow. Have you done that, Ben?
No, I wouldn't advocate for it.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that, there's a certain amount of interaction with clients that you could automate down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you bragged about that to your peers, 50% of them wouldn't believe you, and the other 50 would totally believe you because they could absolutely see how that's possible.
Yeah.
So I think that would be an interesting way of really like making a splash to your AM peers.
I think this is already going to be an invite for you to be back on the show, because one thing I really love hearing about is like growth hacking and like how to hack your job to like get maximum return. And I think you've told me about the Google alerts before, but there's a couple of other tricks I think you use to like really optimize your time. And that's something I definitely want to pick your brain about in the future. So I hope you will come back on this podcast.
Happily.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is the first episode. For anyone that's watching that doesn't know, Ben is a very close friend, but he's also the one that's been like encouraging me to go through with this. This show wouldn't be happening without Ben. So thank you for helping me push through it. Before we head off, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything you want to plug? Anything you want people to know? This is your time to shine even brighter than you have already.
Well, let me first say I think you've crushed it.
Oh, damn.
Like this was good.
Yeah.
This is easy, accessible for your audience and for the guests as well.
Heck yeah.
So good job.
Ben's debriefing me. Yeah.
Yeah. I would just say maybe to summarize again, people may look at tech. I have a lot of friends that do an account management role outside of tech. Mm-hmm. And I say to them, why don't you get into tech? And they think to themselves, I'm not a techie person. I don't know how the technology works, this, that, and the other. As you've seen, with analogies, this is the best analogy I can give you. The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
I don't personally go behind the curtain.
Okay.
So I don't actually need to understand how it works.
Right.
My technical skill set and your technical skill set are not remotely in the same region.
Right.
However, I've worked for a number of tech companies and I don't feel remotely inadequate because it's not my job.
Right.
I don't need to understand that. What I need to understand is the value proposition. I need to understand what it can do. I need to understand if you ask certain questions, who to direct them to, and ultimately manage commercials. None of that is actually really technical.
Right.
In as much as if you work at a car dealership, do you understand how the engine works? You don't, but you can still sell cars.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea here, right? So I would emphasize to anyone that is looking at, should I get into tech? Should I not get into tech? Don't see the tech portion of it as a huge hurdle. If you're looking at an account management role or whatever, no one's going to sit there and put a bunch of matrix code on the screen and expect you to understand it.
Yeah.
And if you did, you're in the wrong role.
Right.
So don't see it as a hurdle. Tech is very accessible. It is made for the layperson. We all have technology in our lives today that is utilized by people who are not techie and they know how to use an iPhone. So it's the same concept. Tech is accessible. Don't feel like technology is going to be the barrier for you not to get into it. It's a booming industry. It's very lucrative. There's infinite amounts of growth. And, I just want more people to get into tech because at the end of the day, there's a huge deficit of skill.
Hell yeah. That's awesome, Ben. Thank you, Ben, so much for being on the show. I'm assuming if people want to know more about you, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Hit me up.
He's always there. But yeah, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hope to have you back on in the future.
Happily. Thanks.